This week's Torah portion, Vaitchanan, which literally means, to beg. Moses begs to God to let him into Israel, or we recount that scene. And one of the most interesting things, right? So Vaitchanan, and in fact the whole book of Deuteronomy, Dvarim, is sort of Moshe recounting what had happened in the desert, and it's a sort of last speech, before we part our ways. And in Vaitchanan, one of the, I think the first thing that comes to mind, that sort of cries out from the text when you read Vaitchanan, is the incredible amount of times, the number of times, where Moshe, there's this, he repeats over and over again, keep the mitzvahs, keep the commandments. Ushmaltem et ha-mitzvot, ushmaltem, ve'Hashem tziva etchem. The verb shamar, I think, appears more than any other word, perhaps other than Moses and God, in this week's Torah portion. And it's almost obsessive, right? It's 12 times, right? Count the amount of verses divided by 12, every few verses, ushmaltem, and just, he's sort of reminding us, and I think it might even be unparalleled in the Bible. Why does it appear so many times? Not only that, one of the things that Moshe recounts in this week's Torah portion is the 10 Commandments. Now you could say to yourself that the 10 Commandments, it's such a big deal, it's a sort of, the scene in the Bible. We already have it. Why say it again? We'll do an interesting exercise. If you compare page for page the commandments in this week's Torah portion, Vaitchanan, and the commandments in Yitro, you will see that they're not exactly the same. One of the striking differences is the commandment of Shabbat, to keep the Sabbath. So back in Yitro, it says remember the Sabbath, Zachor. But in line with this the obsessive amount of times where it says ushmartem, and you kept, the verb for Shabbat in the 10 Commandments in this week's version is not remember the Sabbath, but keep the Sabbath, ushmartem. And so too, you will see that there are additional words that have been put into the 10 Commandments in this week's Torah portion, and that's right, you guessed it, they are v'tziva otchem, and God commanded you. This obsessiveness with doing, what is going on here? So another interesting thing about Deuteronomy, about Vaitchanan, and I think we've seen this in several Torah portions, is that while we always like to look at the books of the prophets and sort of see prophets as those who prophesied, in fact I think the Bible is the one that is making all of the strongest prophecies regarding Jewish history, and we have one of them in this week's Torah portion. First of all, we are told that we're going to be kicked out of the land. We're going to beg God to come back, He's going to bring us back, right, before we've even entered the land. So that's one prophecy. We are also told, this is perhaps something which some Jewish demographers aren't going to like, right? There's always talk of how we could up the numbers of, the Jewish people. Birthright and other such organizations. But in Vaitchanan, it makes it quite clear that one of the reasons that God, loves us or courted us was because we are a small people, implying perhaps we will always be a small people. A small people, and what makes us unique? It says, Ushmaltem v'asitem, right? Again, this keeping, and you do the mitzvot, the commandments. Ki hi chochmatchem ubinatchem. We are told in this week's Torah portion why we are meant to keep the commandments. Why? Because the commandments are our wisdom and our knowledge. That's what the commandments are. Now, in fact, Kabbalists even played upon this idea, which finds itself, is manifest in several places in the Bible. Kabbalists saw the world, the cosmos, like we have today, we know about DNA. So already, hundreds and more than 1,000 years ago, Kabbalists were talking about the idea that all this world has a sort of DNA structure, but the structure, instead of it being DNA, what is perhaps invisible and behind the DNA, are the Hebrew alphabet, right? 22 letters, and everything in this world was created through the alphabet, and therefore, everything, we all connected, because just like a rock has inside it a structure of letters, which make it unique as a rock and Evan, so too human beings. And this perhaps can also explain, according to some Kabbalists, why there can be reincarnation, why you can be reincarnated from man to rock or to bird, because if we all have this similar DNA structure, we're all connected. And so too, Kabbalists would say that when you keep a certain commandment, or you sin, you are changing your DNA structure. So if you sin, then your name and who you are slightly changes. And if you keep a commandment, then you've created this positive change. But why is this happening here? I think what's happening here is that Moses knows, this is a prophecy. You don't have to wait for the prophets. Vaytchanan, instead of calling the Torah portion Vaytchanan, which usually we understand to be God, and Moses begging to God, let me go into the land, I think there's another implicit begging here. And it is Moses sees, right? When God said to Moses, I'm going to let you see the land, I don't think he just let him see the land, from Eilat to Metula up north. He let him see until the end of time what is going to happen. That is what I think. And I think once Moses has this knowledge, he's prophesizing, he knows what's going to happen, and he's begging, just keep the mitzvahs. Right? I think Vaytchanan is trying to say that is the essence. There's always going to be a debate amongst Jews what these mitzvahs are. Moses knows that, and he's saying, keep the mitzvahs. Food for thought for Vaytchanan. Shabbat Shalom.